Okay, you can dim the lights if you'd like, and I'll start. I had to do a couple things to get things working today. Thank you for coming, and thank you for allowing me to present today. My name is Rita Jean Moran. That's my author name and my maiden name. And I'll give you a little history of my background. I have a degree in electrical engineering, and I worked as an electrical engineer and a software engineer for about 15 years. I had kids, I stayed home, and I started to write children's books, specifically in or about mythology. And that's how I kind of fell down this rabbit hole that I call hidden human story. Now, I took a lot of classes at night in anthropology and anatomy to kind of help me along the way, and I got a master's in bioinformatics, which is the study of biology through the usage of computers. But currently, I work in the legal field. But I do this on the side because it's my passion. So let's start with hidden human story. And I hope you enjoy this today and learn. And here we go. Okay. The state of the world. It's a mess. There's a lot of religious conflict. Everybody thinks they know the truth and who their God is and what's right and what's wrong. But how did all this start? And in my opinion, the truth is hidden, which I'm going to tell you about what I've learned along the way through my studies. A good place to start is in Egypt. Everybody knows about the Great Pyramids. Some argue that these are older than the anthropologists say they are. I would tend to agree with the current anthropologists, but there's a very old history in Egypt that is not talked about. And that's revealed through these books that I'm going to talk about. Now, there's a famous bloodline out of Egypt, Isis, Osiris, and Horus, the Osirian pharaohs. But there's also another bloodline out of Egypt that came from Set, red-haired Set, the Setian pharaohs, two competing bloodlines. And Egypt was divided into Upper and Lower Egypt, and eventually it combined. Now, Egypt has a lot of rituals. This is an opening of the mouth ceremony. They are also famous for circumcision. Circumcision was performed quite a bit in Egypt. But where did all these rituals come from? And who were these gods and goddesses? That's just a depiction of them doing circumcision, the ritual in ancient Egypt. Okay, now I'm going to stop. And I'm going to give you a little bit of history before we go in. As I told you, I started off writing children's books. This was the first one, The Library Kids, Mystery of the Blue Mountains. It was about a group of children that find a magical library inside a cave up in Wisconsin. And with this library, they can go back in time and anywhere around the world that they want to. And they go around the world in a 7-book series, and they learn all about mythology and cultures throughout my 7-book series. But at the end of the first book, they end up with a mission. And the mission is they have to battle this evil entity that doesn't want knowledge to come into the world, but they have the help of a being of light. So I wrote this 7-book series, and I began to really get into mythology. And I began to realize that all the mythologies were incredibly similar. And in fact, I started to conclude that the people in all mythologies are the same people. They may have variation from culture to culture. The names vary, there'll be variations in the story, but it's the same people. And there's a key to it, which I'm going to get into. So as I got into this, I began to study a library out of Harvard, which I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, and a lot of other esoteric books that are out there, but not very well known to the public. And I began to study ancient Phoenician scholars, ancient Greek scholars, ancient Roman scholars, and ancient Egyptian scholars. And I found a scholar named Sanchonathan out of the British Library. And in this book, he tells the story of Cronides and the beginning of this family that I call the Cronides. And he tells you a story that's very salacious and violent, but is very much kept hidden. That story is also corroborated in this Loeb Library out of Harvard by many Greek scholars. And what this book told me was that circumcision came from Cronus. It was a ritual. It was an atonement ritual for killing his father, Uranus, and castrating him. Let me read the quote. Cronus, also going about the habitable world, gave to his daughter Athena the kingdom of Attica, and when there happened a plague and mortality, Cronus offered up his only son as a sacrifice to his father Uranus, and circumcised himself and forced his allies to do the same. And not long afterwards he consecrated after his death another son called Muth, who he had by Rhea. Him the Phoenicians called Death and Pluto. That's in Jonathan, History of the Ancient World. Okay. Now, you're going to see some familiar names. There's multiple people with the same names. You'll find throughout this library in these esoteric books that there's multiple Athenas, there'll be multiple Apollos, multiple Dionysus, and so on. But they were different people, and sometimes their stories got combined, and the last person received all the credit or bad, fame from what the other people did. So you have to get into the story to figure out what person is what and what happened in the timeline. See, because you see Athena. That's not the Athena who was the daughter of Zeus. This is a different Athena. Now, this is a little different because back then, they were not monogamous. The men had many consorts. They may have had like one wife, but they would end up having over 40 children with different people. And oftentimes they married their sisters or their half-sister. Okay, so let's go on.
And all this you teach to kids?
No.
Circumcise and married.
Let me continue, please.
Okay.
No. In fact, when I got into this, exactly, that's too violent and salacious to teach to kids. My books are appropriate for the kids, so I realized this isn't appropriate. So I had to separate what I found into a series for adults, and that's called my Hidden Human Story series. And I'm very clear on that this is not appropriate for children, that these are adult books. I'm very clear about that on my internet platform as well. So I separated it out. I'm kind of done with the children's books, and I've been into the adult books for the last 3 years. Yeah, this is nowhere appropriate for children. And these are my middle school books for age 10 to 12 and up. So no, that stuff doesn't go in those books. Okay, so Narmer is the pharaoh that unified Upper and Lower Egypt. He's given the credit for that. And it goes back about 6,000 years in the anthropological record. But what I found was a timeline that goes over 15,000 years ago, about in these books. Okay, so in these books, these esoteric libraries, it reveals who built the pyramid, who were the gods and goddesses, why the rituals, what happened to these gods and goddesses, and why were they always shown as tall? They're always shown as giants in all of the art, and they're described in the stories as very tall. And why were there pyramids and mounds all over the world? These books told me they traveled the world. They traveled the world. It says it. And I'm going to tell you straight out what the problem was. The problem was that there was cannibalism and savagery worldwide. And one of the people, Zeus, had his son killed and cannibalized. That was the impetus to make them travel and spread their agricultural cults. That's revealed in these books. His son's name was Zagreus. And I'm going to tell you the mystery of Zagreus and how it relates to Dionysus as we go through. Okay. Osiris is Dionysus. That is one of his names. In this Diodorus Siculus, this book, it tells you, quote, "And of the ancient Greek writers of mythology, some give to Osiris the name Dionysus, or, with a slight change in form, Sirius. One of them, Eumpalus, in his Bacchic hymn, speaks of our Dionysus, shining like a star with fiery eye in every ray." Diodorus Siculus, The Library of History. Diodorus Siculus was a Greek scholar who spent 30 years of his life going to Egypt and other places to gather the history of the world that he called the Library of History. He wrote 40 books, only about half of them survive today. But he was very complete with what is left. Not only does Diodorus Siculus state this, but Plutarch does as well, and other scholars. Dionysus is Osiris. Okay, so you're like, what? What is this? Like I said, this is only the tip of the iceberg of some of the things I'm learning, and I'm still learning. There's more yet. There's over 500 books in this Loeb library. I've read about 50 of them. And it covers this history all the way up to today. So, how did it all begin? As I told you, I visited a cave, and this idea came in my mind for these children's books, and it blossomed into the children's books, and then as I dug deeper and deeper into mythology, I started to find this stuff and go, wow, how come we don't know this stuff? How come nobody told me this in school? How come they don't talk about this stuff? Why is this hidden? Why isn't it common knowledge? So like I said, it began in a cave for me. Okay, now I'm going to connect up all of your mythologies to your current Abrahamic religions. This book, Valerius Maximus, is a Roman author. He wrote something that I saw it and I was like, what? And here's what he wrote. The Jews had tried to corrupt Roman values with their cult of Jupiter Sabazius, so the praetor forced them to go back to their home. He wrote a little bit more about the same situation. Who is Jupiter Sabazius? That's Zeus. And I saw that and I was like, what? What is this about? So I started to research this, and I'm like, so I started to find ancient art that they specifically called Zeus Sabazius. This is a sculpture at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. That's another page of it. This is another stela out of the British Museum. You see that it says Zeus Sabazius with thunderbolt, and next to it is a tree with an eagle at the top and a snake around the tree. How come you never heard of this? Let me back for a minute. I've seen other things with Zeus Sabazius. There were busts of Zeus Sabazius all over Rome and ancient Europe. Less than probably about 1,700 years ago. Very well known. Very well known who the gods and goddesses were until about 1,700 years ago. And then the memory and the information disappeared slowly. Let's talk about this Loeb library. These are the green and red books up here on this table. Green books are Greek scholars, red books are Roman scholars. And they do have a green book with an Egyptian scholar, Manetho. James Loeb was a Jewish, German, American banker, philanthropist. His family was in the banking industry. He didn't want to be a banker. He wanted to study this stuff. He wanted to study the classics and music. He got sick, and it almost sounded like some kind of a nervous breakdown. I'm not quite sure. They don't really tell enough about it, but after that, he got out of the banking business and dedicated his life and the money he had to putting this library together. In 1867 to 1933, he died. Now, this library was not complete when he passed away. They continue on working on it today at Harvard, doing the translations and keeping the library going, over 500 books. The Loeb Library. 1,400 years of human culture. Now it's over 15,000 years. there's a timeline in these books for when Dionysus Osiris lived, and I'll get to that. Major scholars that I've been studying: Diodorus Siculus, he lived over 2,000 years ago. Valerius Maximus, over 2,000. Nonus, over 2,000. Plutarch, over 2,000. St. Jonathan, they don't even know, 3,000 or more. Snorri Sturluson is a Nordic writer about 800 years ago. I'm studying also not just the Greek and Roman and Egyptian, but Nordic and Celtic and Native American and so on. My work is evolving because I learn something new all the time. I just learned something today. But I'm going to give you a good base so you can look at this and decide for yourself and maybe do some research on your own. Also note this is, if you're Christian, that's fine. I just want to point something out. These people were writing these books before the time of Christ and before the Catholic Church came into existence. Okay, I want to read about this, what Plutarch wrote. Moreover, they call the lodestone the bone of Horus, and iron the bone of Typhon, as Manetho records. Whereas the iron oftentimes acts as if it were being attracted and drawn toward the stone, and oftentimes is rejected and repelled in the opposite direction, in the same way that salutary and good and rational lumen of the world at one time, by persuasion, attracts and draws towards itself, and renders more gentle the harsh and Typhonian movement, and then again it gathers itself together and reverses it and plunges it into difficulties. Lodestone is magnetic. This is lodestone and it's got iron in here. I'm pointing this out because when the Egyptians built things, they put a lot of symbolism in it, and they also understood quite a bit as well. So when people say there's something electromagnetic about these pyramids, there's something extraordinary about them, maybe there is. Just because I tell you how they build it doesn't mean that they didn't use something with some kind of electromagnetic properties that we still are trying to figure out. So what I tell you doesn't mean it's everything. There could be a whole lot more I have yet to discover. But these are a good start. How were these pyramids built? It's in these books. It tells you the name of the pharaohs, which matches with the current anthropologists say today. It tells you that they used mounds to drag the stone from Arabia. It was about 360,000 men. It was three main pharaohs. The first two pharaohs were incredibly mean. And when they got done with the pyramids, the people hated them so much, they couldn't bury them in those pyramids because people threatened to rip their bodies up. So they had to bury these pharaohs with their kinsmen, and that's why you don't find a body. And then the third pharaoh, seeing what had happened, was a lot kinder, and he gave a lot of perks to the people that worked hard, but he died before they finished it. I'm going to read a little bit of it. This is quite lengthy. You can get these books through Amazon if you'd like to read more, or write to me and I'll give you some more information. Diodorus Siculus. It is said that the stone was conveyed over a great distance from Arabia, and that the construction was effected by means of that time. And the most remarkable thing in this account is that though the constructions were on such a great scale, and the country round about of nothing, but they do not have the appearance of being the slow handiwork of men, but look like a sudden creation, as though they had been made by some god and set down bodily in the surrounding sand, because all the construction mounds are gone. All of what they use that's described in these books is gone, and the only thing left are these pyramids. As I said, as they were by the labor of many hands, was returned by the same means to the place from which it came. For 360,000 men, as they say, were employed in the undertaking, and the whole structure was scarcely completed in 20 years. That's the Great Pyramid they're talking about. He's talking about 360,000 men described in this library. Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. So about 4,500 years ago, 5,000 years ago. Not quite 5,000. And the Nile's moved. So there may be, like, I've heard that they talk about the Sphinx having watermarks on it. I don't know if anybody's really looked to see if that could happen because the Nile moved. I know they think that the Sphinx is 12,000 years old. I have not found anything in here about the Sphinx yet. It may be, because they looked at the alignment of everything to Orion and went back and said it matched what the sky looked like 12,000 years ago. Well, that may be possible. But I'm telling you that there's a version in here that describes how they were built and by whom and why there were no bodies in here. I want to talk about my mythological unification theory. I've already alluded to that. I told you that I'm studying all the mythologies, and this is an evolving theory. I told you that all of the mythologies are about the same people. I call them the Cronides because they descended or are related to Cronus. And as I told you, they traveled the world, and every culture represents them in an image of the people of that culture to a certain degree. Although in India, sometimes they put them as blue, or in Egypt, Osiris may be green or blue or black. Those have symbolic meanings. I used comparative mythology, these books. I looked at art. I did a whole lot of thinking to come up with this theory that's still evolving. I started looking at art. That's God, and that's Adam, right? Michelangelo, famous. What is God in? Look at what he's in. It looks to me to be a pomegranate. A pomegranate is like a fruit out of the Mediterranean, and it has a lot of seeds. A lot of seeds. And there's the green part, which would be the vine. Also, look at it. Look at their hands. Let's see if I can do this. It's like a triad claw. Do you see what I'm telling you? You see that in the hands? This is in a lot of your art. There's symbolism in your art. Your ancestors are giving you a message. You've got to look at it. What's this? These are tarot cards from Rider-Waite. What does the emperor have in his hand? And what is behind the high priestess on that Kabbalah tree? Pomegranates. I believe these tarot cards represent the Cronides as well. There's a story in there, and so does Kabbalah and Qliphoth, which I'll discuss throughout this presentation. That's a Kabbalah tree behind that high priestess. Zeus is the father of all things, Diodorus Siculus. Now the spirit they called, as we translate their expression, Zeus. And since he was the source of the spirit of life in animals, they considered him to be, in a sense, the father of all things. And they say that the most renowned of the Greek poets also agrees with this when he speaks of this God as the father of men and of gods. Well, if Zeus is the father god, who is the devil or Satan? I found that out too, and I believe it's Prometheus. A lot of people tell you it's Cronus, Saturn. I believe Cronus is the leader of the Watchers, and I'll explain that down the road with the text I found. Helen Blavatsky says, hence the allegory of Prometheus, who steals the divine fire so as to allow men to proceed consciously on the path of spiritual evolution, thus transforming the most perfect of animals on earth into a potential god and making him free to take the kingdom of heaven by violence. Hence also the curse pronounced by Zeus against Prometheus and by Jehovah El-Debayan against his rebellious son, Satan. They've coded this information up. It's in all your mythologies. It's in these books. They just keep it hidden from the public. These occultists know what's going on as well. That's Persephone. And what floor is she on, and what is she holding? She's holding a pomegranate, and that's a black and white floor. This is an important character in mythology you don't hear a lot about. She was the daughter of Demeter and Zeus. Her secret is Zagreus, which is written about in this library. Okay, I'm going to get into Zagreus in a bit. This family started out in ancient Tyre, according to Sanchonathan. And it started off with a mother goddess, and she's known by different names in different cultures, like Chaos in Greek, Tiamat in Sumerian. And she had a husband, Ebzu, or the Abyss. There were 2 generations between her and her husband and Uranus and Gaia. Uranus was a violent man. He had many children by different women, and Gaia didn't like that, but she had like 12 children with the guy. Those would be your titans, including Cronus. And as I said, it's a violent and salacious history with these people, which is probably another reason why they keep it hidden. But he abused her. She had to get away from him with the help of a gentleman named Thoth. It's written about here. Sometimes they call him Hermes. It's not the same Hermes as the son of Zeus. Eventually, after threatening her and her children too many times, when Cronus grew up, he killed Uranus and he took the kingdom. And he ruled it for a while with his brother Iapetus. But he ended up killing his brother and another brother because he didn't want them to have power. He wanted it. Now, if you go through these books, you'll find out Cronus also traveled, and he traveled into Italy with a king named King Janus. Macrobius talks about how they set up the calendar system and farming. They were friends. King Janus is the king that has the 2 faces, and the month January is named after him. Saturnalia by Macrobius, it's all in there, those books. Saturn also is another name for Cronus. Now, in art, they show him eating his children, and the story is that Rhea had to hide Poseidon and Zeus. Zeus was hidden on Crete, Poseidon on Rhodes. The problem is Cronus started to sacrifice his children and other people's children to control the people. And he convinced them that this was a way to bring fertility and right, the wrongs. He's the one who introduced the human sacrifice cults. Zeus and Poseidon escaped that. I read to you before, he killed his son Pluto, who is also known as Hades. Do you ever see Hades with children in Greek mythology? No, because he was killed early on. But they say that Hades took a wife named Persephone in the underworld. Through these books, they call Zeus underground Hades, because it's all kept quiet. The fact is that Zeus abducted his own daughter and impregnated her, and then was born Zagreus. Zagreus was supposed to inherit his kingdom. Obviously, if Zagreus was killed as a child and cannibalized, that wasn't going to happen. The story goes that he found, Athena, his daughter, found the heart and what had happened. The heart was used to create a potion to reincarnate Zagreus. And there's different versions of the story. Some say that he gave that potion to Semele before he impregnated her. Others say that he took it thinking he had the soul of Zagreus in him. That is where the term sacred heart comes from. He impregnated Semele, and Dionysus was born as the reincarnation of Zagreus and creating the Sacred Heart bloodline, or the pharaohs of Egypt. Now they had to hide Dionysus because there were too many enemies. And they gave Dionysus to Rhea, the grandmother, and Hermes. And they took him, and I'm going to get into this, to a place that was called Nisa, which I think was in ancient Israel. And they raised him as a girl, so people didn't know him. He had to dress like a girl and act like a girl because he had too many enemies until he was grown enough to defend himself. So he's oftentimes shown as effeminate. That's why. And that's written out in these books by the Greek scholar known as in the Dionysica, which, can we hold the questions to the end, please? Sure. Thank you. I also believe, like I said, the Native Americans of the Native American cults, like the Birdman cults, Quetzalcoatl, are about these people. Because these books tell you they traveled the entire world to spread their agricultural cults. Okay, I'm going to read a little bit of this. Osiris was the first day recorded to make mankind give up cannibalism. For after Isis did discover the fruit of both wheat and barley, which grew wild over the land along with the other plants, but was still unknown to man, and Osiris had also devised the cultivation of these fruits. All men were glad to change their food, both because of the pleasing nature of the newly discovered grains, and because it seemed to their advantage to refrain from the butchery of one another. As proof of the discovery of these fruits, they offered the following ancient customs, which they still observe. Even yet at harvest time, the people make their dedication of the first heads of the grain to be cut, and standing beside the sheep, beat themselves and call upon Isis. By this act, rendering honor to the goddess for the fruits which she discovered. I'm going to stop for a minute. Demeter also is credited with discovering wheat. They sometimes, sometimes corn, they say, but it's, I think it was more wheat. Although I've seen an Indian goddess holding a piece of corn, maize. How is that possible? I don't know. Isis, as described in Nonus, is a Radney. That's the woman famous for the Minotaur. Okay, if you know that story, King Minos is the son of Zeus. His wife had some kind of a strange relationship with a bull, and the father found out after the child was born deformed, and they put him in the Minotaur, or made him the Minotaur and put him in a labyrinth, and that their enemies would have to send children to go into this labyrinth because they had killed another son of King Minos, and Minos beat them in war, and that was the agreement. But Theseus came, and Ariadne fell in love with Theseus, and she helped him find his way out of the maze after he killed the Minotaur, which was her brother. They went off to Naxos, an island, and he abandoned her there. There's different versions, and what you'll find through these mythologies are sometimes there's different versions of the story, but the main story's there, so you kind of have to flesh it out. Some say she killed herself. Others say that she married Dionysus but died later in battle. I think she just went to Egypt with him and reinvented herself, because she is the wife of Dionysus. Ariadne is the wife of Dionysus, and Dionysus is Osiris. I told you they traveled the world. And there's a timeline in these books. Let me read that to you. The number of years from Osiris and Isis, they say, to the reign of Alexander, who founded the city which bears his name in Egypt, is over 10,000, but according to other writers, a little less than 23,000. Add about 2,000 years to that, because Alexander lived about, 2,300 years ago? That's from 12,000 to 25,000 years ago these people lived. My estimates, by looking at the pharaoh list from Manetho, I think that they were around about between 15,000 and 19,000 years ago, but I could be wrong. It could go as far back as 25,000 years ago. It says also, Zeus overcame him in battle, and on gaining supreme power, visited all the inhabited world, conferring benefactions upon the race of men. That's from also Theodorus Siculus. And I've spent a lot of time researching this. As I said, I'm always learning something new. There's over 500 books in this library. I've only read about 50. There's always something that pops up, something in mythology. Somebody tells me something on YouTube or sends me an email, and I have to look into it. But generally, I know this family existed, and I know they traveled, and I know that they are the basis of all mythologies and religions. And I know that there was a problem with cannibalism, which has also been proven out because the Neanderthals were cannibalized all over Europe, and there's a terrible cannibalism problem all over the Americas. There was a anthropologist out of the University of Arizona, Dr. Christy Turner, studied this, and he got a lot of hatred, but he proved out in over 70 sites in the Southwest, there's a lot of cannibalism going on, a lot of warfare. And he had so much hatred, but he proved it out. He was able to prove it out. And he wrote a book called Man Corn. That's available on Amazon.
In Europe?
in the Americas and Europe. They still have cannibalism in Papua New Guinea. There's a YouTube video out there of a guy bragging that he's tasted human flesh, and that's what they do. There's problems with cannibalism in Africa. They eat the pygmies, the people that you call the pygmies, the little people. It's terrible. They kill them and cannibalize them. There's stories out there all over the news. If you don't believe me, go look. There's still problems with that. The key for me to figure all this out as I was going over and over this is the murdered son, Zagreus. Every one of these mythologies has a murdered son. Odin had Balder murdered. Osiris was murdered. Dionysus was murdered. Dumuzi was murdered. One of the Celtic gods was murdered. And always with this heart. There's always the sacred heart going on. You see that in your Catholicism and all over Mesoamerica. Zeus is also Odin. The proof? Snorri Sturluson Prose Edda in the Gylfaginning. Next, they made for themselves in the middle of the world a city which is called Asgard. Men call it Troy. I believe Troy is in modern-day Turkey, right next to Mount Olympus in Greece. There you go. The Dionysius of Ionis, I told you about that out of the Loeb Library. This is Krishna. The Nonus tells you that Osiris not only went into Egypt and parts of Greece, but he conquered what is now India. He spread his cults. There were only 2 or 3 kings in India that would not go along. And the last one was King Darides. They went to battle for 9 years, and he killed them. I believe Dionysus is also the Hindu Krishna. And what do you see with Krishna? Playing the flute with the maidens, just like Dionysus did in his younger day, before he was with a Radha. Always shown as a child and an adult, young adult. Just like Dionysus. This young child is to represent Zagreus. This is the reincarnation of Zagreus. Now there was an earlier Dionysus that was part Indian who was part of this King Ammon out of Egypt and an Indian maiden, but it is not. It is a different story. Sometimes you'll hear Dionysus twice born or thrice born because there were different Dionysuses. The Indian one, Zagreus, and then the last one, the famous one, the god of wine, Osiris. Here's a mosaic of Dionysus fighting the Indians from Rome. How come you haven't seen this or know anything about it? They didn't teach you this in the schools, right? There it is. This guy was all over India. So I began to connect all these mythologies up, and as I said, I came up with the mythological unification theory. By the way, this is Kokopelli out in the southwest of America, that petroglyph, playing the flute with the hump. That's Krishna doing the same thing, and they look pretty darn similar. So I just started to put names together. I'm still working on these charts. Like I said, it started off with this goddess. You see this is a Sumerian goddess as a dragon. Tiamat was killed. Yeah, he did kill her. The Sumerian mythology says he killed her and her husband, Uranus did, before he was killed. But she has different names. She's part of the Egyptian Ogdoad and various things, and her husband, Ebzu. And then you have the middle god. You don't hear too much about these in-between ones, but they're part of the Ogdoad. Nyx and Erebus, Hemera, and Ether. Like I said, I don't hear too much. I don't see too much. They kind of are quiet. There's a little bit, I think this guy, the husband was killed by a lion. It's described in this Sanchanathon, because he's the father of Uranus, and he was killed by a lion. And then you have Uranus. Now you get into some of your symbolism. Ouroboros, there's Gaia, all of their names. Cronus with his sigh or sickle, right? He's also the Gnostic Yaldabaoth. It talks about the demiurge in this Nag Hammadi library being thrown into Tartarus in here, and his son Sabazius takes over. Takes over. That's Zeus taking over after Cronus is defeated. Various names. Enlil in Sumerian, you'll see the symbol of Saturn on the cylinder seals from Sumer with this god Enlil. Rhea, Zeus, all kind of names. All kind of names. Hera, his jealous wife. Demeter, she went off to Sicily. I want you to notice how big she looks next to that guy. And if I could see, he has a beard, right? They're always shown as huge. They're always described as white, tall, frightening. What is she doing? She's giving you this symbol. This is a Cronide blessing symbol. Your inquisitors of the Inquisition would give this symbol. Back it up a minute. What's he doing? He's giving you that symbol too. You gotta look at this art because all that information's in there. You just gotta open your eyes and start seeing it. Hera, she was a virgin goddess, the best of virgins. Poseidon, Hephaestus, and all the rest. This one is very famous, Aphrodite. I told you that the men had a lot of consorts. The women kind of, maybe they had a brother or half-brother. Demeter kind of had a couple lovers, but that wasn't the norm. The women only had usually one partner. The men had a lot of partners. She didn't go along with that. This is the wife of Hephaestus who cheated on him with Ares, and he kicked her out. She kind of went up by Babylon in that area. She had a lot of children with different men. She gets confused with Ashtaroth, who was a goddess of war. This is a goddess of love. Ashtaroth was a half-sister of Cronus. Tanit is another one of her names. She's not the same person as this. And she's got a history as well. She kind of went along with the human sacrifice stuff with Cronus. She had her own queendom in, I guess it would be ancient Syria, that area. I'll talk about her in a minute. It's not the same person. Athena ended up in Ireland. I've got some books that say that she would be Bridget. And they had to fight these Fomorians who were doing nasty things to the people in Ireland, like killing their children and enslaving them. She came in after the battle and took over the royal bloodline, married King Bree, but then he was killed. She married somebody else. So a royal bloodline, that would be the Tuatha De Danann, came from her, and then the Molassians came in. But you had a lot of different groups in Ireland, like the Numidians, and then, like I said, Tuatha De Danann, these Fomorians, and then, like the latest, the Molassians came from the Pharaohs. Queen Skoda, they think. There he is, lots of names. All over the world he went. King Minos, I talked about him. This is a marble statue that's, I think, in the Vatican. That is Arabian Dionysus. Prometheus, lots of different names for this guy. I'm going to prove to you that the Church of Satan and the Church of Set is about this guy. He's the god of fire and arts. He also has a huge statue at the Rockpost Center in New York. Okay, let me show you something. I was at a Civil War days, and they had a set of matches called Gentlemen's Lucifers. Okay, great. branches. What's he got in his hand? He taught people how to use the fire, but he introduced animal sacrifice, and Zeus didn't like that. But his other counterpart is Set, red-haired Set in Egypt. He took part in killing Dionysus, Osiris, and that's why he's cursed. A lot of different names. Jewish Kabbalah would be about these Cronides, mainly Zeus. The Clip-off is going to be Prometheus and his bloodline. He had a bloodline too. The Hellenes in Greece, who eventually went into Syria. He had some in Egypt. I'm going to prove to you that he was in Egypt, and maybe some other places as well that I don't quite know about yet. I told you about Zagreus being murdered, the heart being found, and being reincarnated. I want to read this. Thereupon Zeus, taking up the child, handed it over to the care of Hermes and ordered him to take it to the cave in Nysa, which lay between Phoenicia and the Nile, where he should deliver it to the nymphs, that they should rear it, and with great solitude bestow upon it the best of care. Consequently, since Dionysus was reared in Nysa, he received the name he bears from Zeus and Nysa. That's from Theodore Siculus' Library of History. What is between the Nile and Phoenicia? Modern day Israel. Look at a map where Phoenicia was and where the Nile is. Okay, and like I said, he went everywhere and then a Randy. I told you about the key. I'm going to point out this. You see this hand down here with fingers again? That's a famous hand of Sabazius. Those were items that they worshipped before all the Abrahamic religions took hold. But it's giving you that Cronide blessing, and there's symbols all over it. And then you have Dionysus, Osiris with this crook and flail, and with the wine and this Kabbalah tree. What do I look at this? Jesus Christ. What's he always holding? A heart. Different versions of Zeus, all of his symbols. They all had symbols associated: lightning bolts, phoenix, eagle, pomegranates, the water god, rain, fertility, a bull. A bull is associated with a lot of these gods: Cronus, Zeus, a red bull for Prometheus, a bull for Dionysus, two-finger blessing for planet Jupiter. So there's symbolisms like everywhere. And I kind of came up with a chart of his bloodlines based on my research, but this is ongoing, and you can see that it was all over the place. Heracles is the equivalent of Gilgamesh. They're always strangling a lion. Hephaestus, he had even Scythes was from the Scythians. He made a son named Scythes, who took over the Scythians, became the king. Athena went into Ireland. Aeneas is supposed to be a descendant of Aphrodite. Aeneas is famous for the Trojan War. When the Trojans lost, they went into Italy, and their bloodline became some of the royalty, but some of their bloodline actually went up into England. Brutus, King Brutus, went up to England, and that's where your King Arthur bloodline came from until the other bloodline, I think it was King William, the Conqueror, came in. But there's a problem with some of these bloodlines because the Trojan War was much, much later than when these people existed. And my theory is a lot of times some of these people later on that weren't related to these people, they may be a descendant, and so they just claim to be a child of that a god or goddess. But this Trojan War was about 3,000 or so years ago. It was way much longer before or after these people existed. So the same thing goes with the Nordic bloodline. They attributed their bloodline to Frey, which is the equivalent of Apollo. but that didn't really come into effect till a few thousand years ago, or a couple thousand years ago. So I'm guessing, just like Alexander the Great said that he was a son of Zeus, but I mean, that's not really it. It had to be the one that was married to his mother, Olympia. But he felt that he was the son of Zeus. So sometimes I think with some of these bloodlines, if they come much later, I don't believe they're that, you know, an actual son at that time, but maybe a descendant. So sometimes when you look at these bloodlines, histories, the timelines are off. And that was discussed in these books. Somebody was saying, I think it was Diodorus, was saying that they can't be, some of these people can't be saying that they were related to that time period because Hercules or Heracles was clearing the land of these savage wild animals like lions. And by the time these people, later bloodlines came around, all of that was cleaned up. So not only were they trying to spread the agricultural cults, they were getting rid of these lions and animals that were a menace to people, that were eating people or killing them. Prometheus was in Egypt. That's written about. It says, while Osiris and his army were thus employed, the Nile, they say, at the time of the rising of Sirius, which is the season when the river is usually at flood, breaking out of its banks, and inundated a large section of Egypt and covered especially that part where Prometheus was governor. And since practically everything in the district was destroyed, Prometheus was so grieved that he was on the point of quitting life willfully. Because its water sweeps down so swiftly and with such violence, the river was given the names Aedas. But Heracles, being ever intent upon great enterprise, and eager for the reputation of a manly spirit, speedily stopped the flood at its reach, and turned the river back into its former course. Consequently, certain of the Greek poets worked the incident into a myth, to with the fact that Heracles had killed the eagle, which was devouring the liver of Prometheus. It says it in there. He had a kingdom in Egypt.